And I think it would have been interesting to see what kind of matchups they would have had between the Bulls and the Celtics with a Reggie Lewis, with Len Bias, because for those of you who don't really know or don't really remember, Len Bias, I mean, it's hard for me if you had to compare Len Bias to somebody now, who would it be, you think?
Oh, looking at me,
I think
bias.
I think LeBron, since they played the same position at the same height, I don't think it's like LeBron. LeBron's just a special case. But as far
Yeah,
as just, somebody that you think that is most like a Len Bias, I'm tempted to say from what I remember of him, I'm tempted to say Kevin Durant. I'm tempted to say that, but he didn't have the height as Kevin Durant, but he had the athleticism and the outside shot. And the one thing that he had that Kevin Durant didn't have was just the interior toughness, the
hmm
rebounding toughness. He was a tenacious rebounder. He was what, 6'8", 6'9", from Maryland, played in the ACC. He was, I think, the ACC Player of the Year in 1986.
yes, he
Um,
was.
um, so it was, and he was like the last great Maryland player during the Lefty Driesell era in Maryland. Um, so I mean, he was so athletic for his size, and he was somewhat of a, I guess you can say, quote unquote freak athletically, for whatever you could call that in the mid 1980s. He was that, in my opinion.
It's weird because he was you really couldn't pencil him because the hard part is you never really got to saw him with his game fully developed,
Right. He was
because
still kind of raw. He was a college
correct.
player who was raw.
So from what I saw of him, because I still remember I woke up, we had just gotten out of school, and I woke up one morning, I want to say it was like the summer after fifth grade. I remember I woke up and it was just everywhere that he had passed.
Yeah.
And it was like, you would hear people would say, he passed, he passed, he passed. But in those days, you know, if the story happened too late, it wouldn't be in the paper until the next day. And it
Right.
wasn't, the news cycles weren't like you could find out instantly now. But anyway, on to your question. At that time, he was kind of like weird because he had some elements of James Worthy
Right.
around the basket and ability to finish. To your point, he had some abilities of Kevin Durant with the outside shot, not quite the handle at that point.
Right.
But I think under the tutelage of Bird, McHale, Red Auerbach, I think Casey
Casey
Jones,
Jones.
he would have stayed. He wouldn't have left had he not died. I think
Right.
he would have stayed on. Obviously, I
Right.
don't think I think he had some elements of Sean. I saw some Sean Kemp, like not quite as big as Sean Kemp,
No.
but some elements of Sean Kemp,
That's a good one.
and
That's a good one right there.
and then also some elements of some Tracy McGrady elements too.
Right. Right.
He was
Right.
like a combination of like he would have. I felt he'd have been a combination of like Tracy McGrady, Sean Kemp, James Worthy. Because to your point about Kevin Durant, even though he had Bias had an outside shot, at that point he wasn't as fluid and comfortable in the open court. He could dribble and stuff, but not like KD could. But conversely, he was much stronger on the boards and much stronger back to the basket. And then, he would have been a guy that would have been too fast for fours, too big
Right.
for threes. Like,
Right.
you try to put a
Right.
four on him, he
Yeah, he
face
was a
up,
he was a miss.
you
He was
know,
a walking mismatch
you
for
know,
any kind of defense at the time of the NBA during the late '80s.
correct.
He was a walking mismatch because it's
You
just
know,
like you said. He was too big for your typical three to guard him, a typical small forward to guard. He was just too big.
correct.
Okay, but you couldn't put a power forward on him because power forwards back then were basically known for rebounding and inside play. There wasn't like stepping out behind the arc or stepping out from 15 or 18 feet out and just draining just open mid-range jump shots, which Len Bias was very adept of doing.